me here. I'm already struggling with, as you can tell, the PowerPoint. I was asked, we had a conversation with Trey about a couple things and what I could share and talk with graduate students. And we went through a couple of topics, and somehow we ended up in Networking 101, which I'm still not sure how, but I actually do value networking quite a bit. I don't think I know all about it. And so one of the main things I'll be presenting today is kind of my philosophy, maybe how to deal with some of the struggles with networking, how I see some benefits to it, and also the idea of, the service attitude that networking has. We tend to look at networking more as I think a selfish endeavor, or sometimes we tend to struggle it because we have preconceived notions of it. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about all these things. I've prepared first. Trey suggested I introduce a little bit of myself. So I'll talk to you a little bit about my education and very briefly about the kind of research I do. Again, a good opportunity for networking, I guess. And then we'll jump into kind of why we should network and some of the how-tos of networking and maybe some of the benefits of networking. And then I'm going to end with painting a timeline of my life, where I just want to show you kind of some very interesting events that happened in my life that I think have to do with relationships and network, and how if those networks or relationships weren't there, things would have been very different. And so I will potentially use networking and relationships almost interchangeably. And I think that's also a way of me telling you that networking is not just something you do for business, but it is clearly one of the areas where we use it. And so my disclaimers here, I'm not sure what I'm doing. It's I guess, a little bit of banter and fun. And I'm also here to learn and see what you think about it. So hopefully I prepared, like every professor, too many slides, and I will do my best to get through it. And I will call out those not turning on your camera in about a couple of slides. So here we go. All right, with that, let me start by telling you just a little bit about myself. I'm a student of Virginia Tech. So I did my master's and my PhD here at Virginia Tech a long time ago. And there you can see the titles of my thesis, both of my theses there. I did my undergrad at the University of Puerto Rico. I wasn't born there. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then some of my, I guess, more work experience has been that I did a postdoc in England at the University of Bristol, and I worked very closely with a company called Augusta Westland, which is now, I think, called Leonardo. Basically, the company renamed themselves because they want to claim helicopter as the origins being them, which is really funny. I was then kind of a visiting fellow of University of Bristol at the same time I started here as an assistant professor in August 2011. And I've been here for the past almost decade as an assistant professor and now an associate professor. And on top of that, I'm live-in faculty. So if you've ever been to the other side of campus, which most graduate students haven't, right? Dietrich Hall and East Ambler Johnson, maybe you've gone to the basketball stadium, but right across from the basketball stadium is East Ambler Johnson. And I live there with 300 students in what's called the Honors Residential Commons. So this is the office on the first floor of that building. So my house is just upstairs. And this is also, I think, a really interesting view of networking. So it's been a wonderful experience, and I'm on my 4th year of doing that. So let me tell you a little bit of that. I like to paint kind of my visits and my travels, and this is kind of just a picture of my education. And so I started down in the South. I moved to the US, to Texas, where I did summer internships at Rice University. I also did part of my middle school. I did my undergrad, high school, and part of my other middle school in Puerto Rico. I've done my graduate studies, like I said, in Virginia Tech, and I've done my postdoc in England in University of Bristol. And I'm originally from the country down south. Which country is that? My students are not allowed to answer, nor Jacob. Does anybody know? And I can't read the chat, so you have to say something.
Is it Argentina?
It is Argentina. Very good. sometimes it's geographically challenging to know what country it is. Yeah, so I'm originally from Argentina. So I have my education in Puerto Rico in the US. And so I've been around quite a bit. Anyway, so just to tell you a little bit of where I've been and where I'm from. In terms of my research, just a small description, I work in the area of mainly structural dynamics. And so I do work a lot in the general area of vibrations and vibroacoustics and environmental testing. So that's probably my bread and butter. I work a lot with the idea of adaptive structures. So these are structures where we try to augment them with smart materials and use them to have them adapt or evolve to sense their environment and change their characteristics. And then one of my bigger projects on campus has been this idea of smart infrastructure. And that's been the focus of research that uses sensors and information from a building to then infer information about the building, make decisions, and making it a smart building. And I'll show you a couple examples of that research. The video on the left is what I like quite a bit. And this is nickel titanium. So this is a shape memory alloy, a wire that when heated, undergoes a crystal transformation and retains back its original condition. So that's kind of an example of a smart material. But most commonly, we use piezo ceramics to do a lot of our work. Let me get to the next slide. Here's another example of things that we do to leverage structural dynamics. So we work on understanding cylindrical mode shapes in a structure. We actuate those cylindrical modes in very special ways where we create traveling waves that don't reflect at the boundaries. And those are able to generate fluid structure interactions like the ones you see here, which are pretty unique. And so that just shows you kind of an example of some of the work we do. I don't do fluids. I'm not a fluids person, but it's places where we've started to implement our work in things like fluid structure interaction, drag reduction, and so on. And so just another quick example of the ways we leverage smart materials. We like to study biological systems. And so your ear and the cochlear, your cochlea, your basilar membrane, and your hair cells are actually a quite impressive sensor that you carry every day. Very, very sophisticated. And we lose our hair cells throughout our life. And when we lose those hair cells, we lose the ability to hear. And so what you see in the top image on the left, I guess I can use a pointer, right? Anyway, let me not just, there it is. Oops. Did that shrink everything for everyone? I have no idea what I did.
Yeah, it looks like you turned on captions. If you hit the same button again, it should go away.
There you go. Thanks, Jacob. I didn't even know that existed. All right, so what you see here are hair cells in your ear, which do the transduction of acoustic information to electrical impulses into your brain, right? Which is supposed to be the image you see here kind of graphically in terms of a signal coming out of the hair cell and going into your brain for interpretation. These are your hair cells after a football game, right? You go to a football game, you experience 140 dB constant pressure, and that's a joke, by the way. But actually, that's what OSHA has regulations on how long you can be exposed to noise, right? Because you tend to lose these hair cells. Now, you also lose them for many other reasons, including diseases or genetic degradation and so on. And so what we try to do is actually mimic the behavior of these hair cells using piezo ceramics. So active cantilever beams that behave and are susceptible to the same kind of acoustic pressures such that they can produce an electrical impulse into your brain and replicate that behavior. So maybe one day in 40 years or 100 years, we'll be able to implant these hair cells directly into your cochlea and restore your hearing. So that's just kind of a nice way of putting some perspective of some of the research that we do and how we use it in that way. And then the other thing that I like to do is I like to do a lot of work that's very multidisciplinary. And so what you see here, it's me with David Ehrlich, who's the violinist on the right-hand side, and he's carrying a Carlos Bergonzi violin worth about $2 million. And it's one of the few good investments that Virginia Tech has made. So they bought it at 700 and it's now worth over $2 million. And it's a very, very beautiful piece of equipment. And so we try to do work in trying to understand the dynamics and the behavior of this instrument, understand why it works better than other instruments. And we have also involved understanding the user itself. So a lot of the studies down out there where people try to tell the difference between two instruments have only been done where people measure from outside or perceive from outside what's happening. And people haven't, for example, instrumented the player to see how he adapts to the different instruments. And so we do work where we take a very expensive piece of equipment like this, we do an MRI, we extract the shape of the structure, we create a final model, we study it, we test it, and so on. It's a lot of fun and a lot of very interesting works. Things that came out from interesting conversations, never thought we'd be doing this kind of work. And then if you've been on campus and you've been to Goodwin, Goodwin is one of the most instrumented buildings in the world for vibrations. And that's one of my projects as well. And there we do a lot of work where we try to understand structural behaviors as well as human structure interaction. And so we're not going to get into this today, but just to show you a little bit, we do work in anything from how do you instrument a building, how do you interpret the data. What you see in the top right-hand corner is a shock wave that went across the country from an earthquake in Oklahoma and arrived in Blacksburg, and that's how our building shook through that moment. Of course, it was basically imperceivable to the human, but it really lets us understand how things happen. And we do things like the one you see on this video, which is human tracking. And so the red is what we call ground truth, is an actual step of a person. And blue is how we use signals from accelerometers in the building to determine where this person is. And actually some of the people on this call are working in this research. And so it's a very complex problem, but we can find a person within sub-meter distances in a 160,000 square foot building. So it's kind of really cool. And we can do other things. We're trying to learn how we can tell things about the occupant itself. So not only the structure, not only where the structure is being excited, but then information about the person that is interacting with the structure, their stride length, their speed, their balance, and that has also health implications. You can monitor, for example, grandma and grandpa at home and do analysis whether they have a condition where they might fall and so on. So those are kind of some of the ideas that we've been doing some work in what I do in terms of my research. So with that, just wanted to paint a quick picture of the things that we've been doing. I'm happy to talk about that in other times. And here's where I want to start talking about a little bit more about networking. And so let me ask you a question. So please turn on your camera and your phone and tell me, do you see any value in networking? And why should we network?
So most of the times, new science is group science, right? At least in a sense that I'm an engineering student. So it's important to be able to communicate well in a group and have networks so that you could do your potential research or research as you want and as you desire, basically. So.
Right. So there's some ability to understand resources, information, sharing, right, and being exposed to things that you might want to do. Okay, good point. Anybody else?
People get more number of jobs through professional networking than just by applying through websites.
All right, very good. Right. So if you submit your resume to one of these massive websites, or even Boeing, for example, do you know that they use basically an algorithm to try to pull out your name? Where they use words to match your resume. So if basically you didn't put the right words in there, you don't even get called up, right? So finding a job through a personal connection might be actually quite fruitful. And so the other thing I want to say, if we do think that networking is valuable, how do you do networking with your cameras off? All right? And so this is an opportunity to network. And I find it funny that every time I give a talk or I give a class or I go to a departmental meeting, so I'm not picking on students, most people have their cameras off in this COVID time, right? And sometimes we have very good excuses why we have the cameras off, right? I have kids in my house, I have a mess. Those are all good reasons, right? But it's actually really important for you to really think about networking at all times. And that's something we're going to talk a little bit later. So let me ask you, does anybody recognize the person on the right-hand side? Again, I don't know. I think my students might, but that's unfair advantage. No one. No one has a guess? I'm sure someone's running it on Google right now. Image search. That is the provost of your university. Right? And the fact that you didn't know or can't recognize the provost in your university should start to at least give you some concern, right? And you don't have to know everyone, and I'm picking this as an example, right? But knowing the provost, like your boss's 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 boss, right, should be something that you're at least faintly aware of. And actually, the provost is very accessible, really good person. Here he is meeting with a lot of my students in the building where I live, right? And so networking is really important, but in academia, we tend to not value it too much. So anyway, we're gonna try to keep moving forward a little bit faster. I'm trying to have your videos and your pictures as well as my slides, and it's not really working. Okay, so let me tell you why I take networking seriously. I think it's the way to do work. If you have, which we'll talk about later, kind of this mentality that you sit in your cubicle and you do your work and everything will be fine, I think you don't understand what work is. Work is done in community, right? So your network is part of that community. It is your community. It is your network, right? They're one and the same thing. And so resources, availability, getting things done, getting help, aligning anything you want to do has to do with your network. And so for some reason, we like to, we're people that like to make things simple, and we like to dichotomize these things, and they don't split. Work is better done with others. And as a matter of fact, it is always done with others, right? If you're a graduate student, you do it with your advisor, but you also do it with your peers, right? You do it with your classmates and your professors in class, and eventually you'll go to a conference, and that'll happen because someone built a conference for you to go to, right? And I think that there's intrinsic value, right? I learn from others. I see new viewpoints. I think there's synergy. There's ways of complementing. And the list just goes on. It brings more purpose. It's more exciting. You can write a grant by yourself, get it and do it, and that's great. But you can write a big grant with a lot of people, and it is fun, right? And exciting, and watch people challenge you and do different things, right? So there's a lot of value, and part of this is something that I'm going to give you homework to go and do on your own. You can be bleak about it, okay? And it still works, right? And so if you can't recognize the Grinch, you might want to watch the video. And people who think solely, right, to progress your career. I'm not saying it's a great thing to progress your career. That's not the point. But if you're looking at networking just as a way of progressing your career, I think it's pretty sad. Or getting that job, right? Or having a political agenda, getting your way, getting to your boss. I think those are ways that I think are quite damaging to the approach of networking. And I see it a lot. I see it at conferences. I see students do it. I see faculty do it. And we'll talk about that later. It's blatant. People can tell. And people don't like to be used. Okay, so I think you should look more carefully at why you want to network. The least you can do, and I'll talk about this in the next slide, is understand your worldview in light of networking. So what do I mean by that? We can't get into this. I mean, this is an entire ethics course. But how you see the world and how you see value and how you think of people and relationships in your career will greatly influence how you think of networking. And so a homework assignment for you is to really think what it means for you, all these big questions in life, right? What is important? What gives meaning? Why do I work? And that will definitely affect how you network. If your goals are money, success, top of the food chain, right? How you network can be very vicious. So I want you to think about that, and you can disagree with me. That's perfectly fine. But you should also show evidence. All right. So we're not going to spend too much in these, but we can come back and talk about them. So I want to share with you some helpful thoughts on how to network or why it matters and what to think about. And here I've kind of listed them all random, and later I'm going to put them in categories as we go. I want you to think about demystifying your contacts. It can be very intimidating to try to meet someone, right? You need to learn how to approach other people, and that has to do with culture, protocol, etc., right? You're not going to come meet me the same way you're going to go meet the queen, right? And so you need to understand context and culture. We're going to talk about why some people struggle. We're going to talk about setting goals. Where I think it's, you know, it's also strategic. It's like learning to play an instrument, or learning how to take a derivative, or learning how to write an FE code, right? It's also about being genuine and being available, right? People who are trying to game the system, I don't think they do well. It's also good to know that you shouldn't assume who's a good contact. There's a lot of stories out there that are very interesting about either people below you or above you that you thought were a good contact. I think you should be strategic and proactive. It's something that you do. You have it always in mind. You try to meet people. You go to conferences. It's an active aspect of why you go to conferences. As a matter of fact, it's the main reason I go to conferences. Networking is a two-way street. If you're trying to meet someone, someone's trying to meet you. So be as helpful as you are proactive in trying to meet people. And another thing is, it doesn't always work. A lot of crash and burn experiences, and I'll share with you one of my best ones. All right, so demystifying your contacts. So let me go again. Do any of you recognize the people in the picture? I know it's kind of hard. They're wearing masks. Anybody? Not one? You see my cursor? This guy?
Maybe the president of the university this time?
Yeah, very good. That's the president. This is the associate vice president. So this is the vice president for student affairs. And then this is Tracy Vosberg. And if you've seen her emails and her news articles everywhere. Very well connected to President Sands. That's just an example right there. And here you see them.
Something, sorry. Like, I remember you asked the question. I remembered something that, you know, I just mentioned here. I think it's related. I read a paper about how we are connected and, you know, how the network works. It was like pointing that, you know, based on the study, every person is connected to the, like, let's say like president of the China, or like president of the United States. Like, we are 6% away from that people, like that, like important person in a network. And I think that's, you know, magnifies the importance of the network.
Absolutely.
Kevin Bacon effect.
Yeah, that's the 6 degrees of freedom of Kevin Bacon. You know, if you don't know the actor, Kevin Bacon's been like on every single movie on the planet. So he's connected to everyone. That's the joke. But you're right. It's the 6 degree of freedom idea. I think I have 3 degrees of freedom to the Pope and 2 degrees of freedom to Bush, right? So it's really funny. You can find people who know someone. And these people are actually quite accessible, if you think. But the point about this idea of demystifying people is that we think they're too busy, they're too important, they wouldn't want to talk to me, right? And we need to get over that very quickly. As a matter of fact, our vice president for advancement, who's probably one of the best connected people in this campus, Charles Flieger, came and gave a talk, and he said, you know, rich people need friends too, right? Which was really funny. He was trying to make a joke. But this idea that we think that we shouldn't connect with these people, that they're too busy. And one of the things that I found out over time is the higher people are on a hierarchical system, actually the lonelier they are. Because everybody says the same thing. Oh, I'm not going to approach them. I'm not going to send them an email. They're too busy. They're too important, and so on. And we really need to get over that, because we need to treat people as people. So you shouldn't overthink it. We shouldn't think that everybody's busy and not going to respond to you. We think that, oh, people have too many contacts. Why would they respond to me? And it's because we're all human and we like talking to people. I like talking to you, right? You like talking to me. We can go have a coffee, and it's a great opportunity. We all benefit from that network, and we also need to be careful who we consider above us and below us or beneath us, right? Staff members, students, alumni, they're all really important for your network. You know, I still work with the great majority of my graduate students after they've graduated. I meet with them daily. Some of them have gone on to be program managers and have funded some of my students' programs, right? And so don't be so only networking up, right? Be aware of other people. I need to speed up because we're going pretty slow, but we are interacting, so that's okay. Things that we need to learn is learn how to approach people. Especially engineers, we tend to, be on the side of introverts, and we have to sometimes work on that. Like any other skill, you want to ride a skateboard, you got to go practice. You got to crash and burn. You got to, try different things, right? So sometimes we struggle with not knowing how to build a network. So seek advice, seek mentorship, learn where and whom you're dealing with. Think about protocols on how to approach, think about cultural differences, and be ready to apologize. So for example, my story here is that I became a postdoctoral student of my advisor in England. And forever I called them Dr. Ewings, because in the US, doctor supersedes the idea of professor, right? And there's a historical context to that we can talk about another day. In England, it's the other way. Until you are a full professor, you're not a professor, you're a doctor. So you're an assistant professor, you're a doctor. You're an associate professor, you're a doctor. They call them readers and lecturers. And so I called him doctor forever. And then one of my friends pulled me over and said, "You've been insulting him all this time." So I ran to his office and I apologized. And we had a really good laugh because he knew the cultural differences, right? But sometimes we need to be careful, and sometimes people do take that very seriously. So you need to understand protocol. Why we struggle? I think some of us, like I said before, we're introverts, and we need to practice, and we need to be brave. We need to team up. We need to go to a conference and grab a buddy and go meet people, right? Sometimes I think the one that's very damaging is we misconstrued networking and building relationships with nepotism. Okay? And nepotism is when we get something we don't deserve, right? Which is very different than adding to your skills and what you deserve a relationship aspect. And so people also tend to think, I want to earn my way. Or people would tend to think, the ivory tower attitude, I'm so good, people should come to me. And I think those are more prideful issues than they are legitimate excuses, okay? And that's a can of worms we can open as well. But I think we need to get over that, and we need to understand that we do work together in relationships, okay? I think it's very important to be honest and to be authentic. Don't play with people, don't use people. When you're desperate and you come to make a contact because you need a job, people understand that you're trying to use them. And sometimes if you're desperate, it's too late. You need to think now in your career, how to build those networks, how to go to conferences, how to meet people, so that in 3 years, you might have a relationship and say, hey, I'm looking for a job, right? It doesn't mean that you can't go now, but it means that you have to be very careful if you're that desperate. People can tell most of the time, and they will question your motives. So I always say, play the long run, play the long game. And I sometimes has taken decades before a contact in a relationship came back to be beneficial in a term of success in work, right? But that's not why I started that relationship. I started it because I cared for people and I wanted to have relationships with people. So truly care about potential collaborations and seek to help others. And in that process, you also build relationships that can one day benefit you. And overall, people are looking, when you want to get hired, people are looking for a partner to do work. People are looking for a partner that gets along with them, that cares for them. And so just like you would. So think of it from that perspective. Okay? And like I said, networking is a two-way street, and we're a university that believes in prosm, right? So you want, as much as you want to know people and increase your network, people want to know you to increase their networks. So be available, be proactive. Meet with people that you might think are below you academically, successfully, because that shouldn't be the reason why you're trying to build those relationships, right? And in no time, people change jobs, change positions, and you find yourself applying for their job, applying to get their approval, and so on, right? So that's why I ask you to question your worldview and think about why you really want to network. All right. I think you should be available for others, right? If you're trying to reach someone and someone's unreachable, never responsive, don't also be that person that doesn't dedicate time to help others, to connect others. Look at your peers and they want to meet a professor and you took a class with that professor, be the one who makes that introduction, right? You've been to a conference before and your advisor just hired new students, help them find their way, right? It takes effort to build a network, and so help others build it as well. Some people think of it as a waste of time to build a network. They think that, you know, they just need to write a proposal and get it funded and get money. And I would say that the great majority of my proposals have been through relationships, right? I had to write a good proposal. It had to be solid. It had to be competitive, and it had to be the best, right? But the opportunities and when it happened and who called me when the opportunities happened, all those things were synergistic and happened through networks and contacts. If you look at it as just a simple return on investment, I think it could be a bad idea. It can be a good return on investment, but you should, if you look at building a network because they're people, it's never discouraging. You're meeting more people, you're learning about their work, you're excited about what they're doing, right? And like I said, don't always look up, like up, right? And I put this in quotations because I don't think up and down are good ways of looking at people. You never know how things change, right? I have graduate students that have funded my work, right? So if I treated them incorrectly, if I disparaged them, if I thought that they weren't worthy, you know, if I thought that they weren't people until they had a doctorate, right? They would have known that and they would have felt that and they wouldn't have wanted to work with me. Like everything in life, be strategic, set goals, go to a conference and say, I'm going to come back with 10 business cards, right? After a while, it becomes natural and you just do it, right? But you can play games. And we used to play a game like this with some of my graduate students initially. You know, the first one to 10 cards, I would buy their drinks or something. And most of my students have found jobs through my network, and I have found jobs through my network, right? You know, if you're terrible at it, prepare lines. You know, well, what do I say to this person? Well, let me do some research on what he's done and let me ask him about his latest presentation. People love to talk about themselves. So if you give them that opportunity, they'll take it. Ask other people to introduce you. I just got off a phone call that someone introduced me. I'm going to one at 2, I think it's at 2, where someone introduced me to a person and I'm meeting them at 2, and I introduce someone who has a meeting at 3, right? It's normal. So don't be afraid to ask people to make those contacts for you. 3 of my students here, I think, have jobs lined up because of things like that. Before you go to a conference, look people up. Before an interview, you better look people up, right? But have a plan. And with this, I'm basically going to finish. And this is the idea that it doesn't always work, right? People think, oh, I have to have this network. I have to meet this person or I won't get this job. My biggest realization was I went to NSF and I went to the program manager that does dynamic systems and controls. And this is 10 years ago, so don't try to find names. And I walked into that person and I walked into another person who did some environmental testing and stuff. And both of those meetings lasted 13 seconds. I drove 4 hours. I walked in, I said, hey, I work on this. And they said, oh, I don't work on that. Thank you for coming. And I was devastated. I thought it was the end of my career, right? I'm laughing now, but I truly did think, I thought, if these people don't fund me, who's going to fund me? And so it doesn't always work, but it's not the end of the world. It's not always you. It's sometimes relationships. Like friendships, you get along with this person, you might not get along with that person. It's not about being disrespectful. It's not about being that someone has something against you. Sometimes you just get along with certain people and you don't get along with other people, and that's okay. So be strategic about how and where you meet and where you put your effort. I was, I think, initially very narrow-minded in who I thought could fund me and where I could build my network and who would need to be my friends for me to develop a career. And actually, I've been funded from the weirdest things that I ever thought, right? Including a Facebook grant funded by chemical and biological engineering, which I never thought, I didn't even know who they were, you know, and so on. So anyway, so with that, I wanted to just add a little COVID crisis, right? Networking during COVID seems nearly impossible. And here's one example for me. I always think you should be creative, right? And when things get tough, you can always be creative. So the gentleman in the middle, his name is Jeff Williams. He's an English professor in the College of, in the English department at Carnegie Mellon. He wrote an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education that I liked. I sent him an email. I said, hey, I really enjoyed your article. He wrote me back and he said, oh, you couldn't imagine how much hate mail I get about that. We hit it off. I asked him for a Zoom meeting. The first 5 seconds were the most awkward 5 seconds of the last 9 months because he turns on his camera, I turn on mine, we stare at each other, we've never seen each other, right? And then you gotta break the ice. And then after that, he came, he gave a talk to the students here in the building, and we've hit it off, right? And now we can't wait for COVID to go away and for us to share a beer, for him to come and visit. So take these opportunities. People are really open to Zoom, which is really weird. And so just do that. I met a guy who's directing a consortium in North Carolina the same way, right? First 5 seconds of opening that conference about the weirdest thing I've done lately. So be creative and find ways. It's not the end of the world because it's COVID. And here, I'm actually gonna use this slide and not the next 3 slides. I basically plotted my story, and I've done this for another reason, but I wanted to show you a couple things. And not the pen, I didn't want to use the pen. Laser. Okay. So I was born in Argentina, right? I went to private school. I went to the University of Puerto Rico. And when I went to the University of Puerto Rico, my dad called a professor. My dad's a professor. He called a professor at Rice University and told him that I wanted to do a summer internship. And he connected us with a guy who was running a really big NSF program on undergraduate research. And then I went there and I ended up doing 2 summer research stints with 2 professors at Rice. So again, a networking connection that got me an undergraduate research opportunity. In 2002, I ended up coming to Virginia Tech as a graduate student, which was my last choice, not my last choice, my last application that I sent. And that was because I ran into an alumni at the University of Puerto Rico who told me, hey, have you not considered going to Virginia Tech? Didn't even know it existed. I went, I visited here, I loved it. And then he told me, oh, by the way, you need to work with this professor. And so he also pointed out what was the greatest opportunity for me, right? All through a network. I got to work with that professor. And then another example here is I started a NASA fellowship through a contact that my advisor had on a project that I was gonna join. That contact broke, and then I had to jump 2 years into my PhD. I started a new PhD program, which a lot of us would cry for that. But it was great. I got to meet the program manager of that Air Force group who, where is it? What is that? From 2006 to 2015, 9 years later, the same program manager funded my Young Investigator Award from the Air Force, which basically set my career. So here was a guy that I had no reason talking to, and I went to a couple reviews and I met him and I made a point to get to meet him, who 10 years later funds one of my most important research endeavors, right? I met a couple of people during my PhD through an interview. I interviewed at Purdue and Ohio State, and I didn't get the job, obviously. And they became deans of very important universities today. And now I'm working with them on instrumenting buildings in other universities, right? And so we can go through tons of examples like that of things that have paid off immediately and things that have paid off more than decades later, right? So be kind of strategic and think of the long-term game. And those relationships I built, I genuinely built them because I wanted to build them. I never thought, oh, this guy 10 years later is gonna fund my Young Investigator Award. I mean, I didn't even know what I was doing. So anyways, I'm gonna skip through these and not talk to them because I want us to talk. And then I'll skip through this because I've kind of said it in the way, which is why I'm sharing this with you. And for me, what's also really important is that the immediate network I work with are my graduate students. And I think it takes, you know, like it takes a village, it takes an authentic network to build something meaningful. And so my current, you know, some of my current students, some of my past students, a lot of my funding groups keep funding us because they like my students, because we have good relationships and so on, right? And I think networking is about relationships, and it's about genuine authentic relationships, right? And it makes the job so much fun, right? So these are just some pictures of me with my students, conferences, charting a flight, them pranking my office with aluminum foil that I think I still have on books, or Christmas decorations, flying first class with one of my students to a conference in Hanover, playing Frisbee, eating out, you know, and doing some weird stuff to mannequins. Anyway, so I mean, it really is about having a great time in relationships and doing that. And of course, I would not lose the opportunity to invite you to be part of my network, right? And so, as a matter of fact, Jacob and I, who's here, right, we've shared coffees, actually in Spanish, and gotten to know each other. So if you want to hang out with me and chat, I mean, I'm always open for a good cup of coffee. There's only one place in town, but we can talk about that later. All right, Trey, do you want to have some questions?
You're muted.
You're still muted, Trey.
I'm muted. I'm sorry. Yeah. So no one has posted any questions in the chat room. So we can say, open your mic and share your thoughts or questions with us, and we'll go from there.
I'll stop the sharing so we can see the pictures a little bit bigger of people.
So I do have a question for Dr. T. And I think, I don't know if we have discussed this before, everything you have mentioned in the presentation, I kind of like, I think the same way you do, but what I found out is, for example, I have been part of interdisciplinary teams, and those are like the better, because there's a lot of people who actually know a lot of things that you don't know. So I think that from those teams, great projects result, and you get crazy ideas, and that has been my experience so far. But what I found on grad school is that the way grad school is, I don't know how to explain it, but the thing is that the path you find in grad school is kind of like a lonely path, which you have to walk with your advisor and your project. And the question here is, what do you think about the efforts that like any university, I'm not talking about Virginia Tech, but any university should do at a graduate level to kind of like create this networking environment inside the university? So you don't have to go actually to a conference, but you could also have like some inside the university networking.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of ways to answer that question. So one of them is that there's personal agency, right? And so you have to think of this as important enough to make an effort. And it's very hard for you to consider this effort, if you want to, you know, transactionally, right, compared to writing a journal, right? A journal on your CV is like easy. You know what it is. You know the value, right? Going to a conference and saying hi to 10 people could have zero return on investment, at least immediately, right? So I think we make a really bad effort as graduate students, right? When I was a graduate student, initially, I made a really bad effort about why I wanted to go to conferences, and I thought, oh, I'm just gonna show everybody in my conference how great I am and look at my cool models. And then actually, when towards the end of my 2008, I went to a conference and I said, no, forget this, I'm gonna meet people. And I got 2 job interviews at that conference, right? And so it was more about building connections. So one thing is that there's an individual personal agency that I think that you can take advantage of. You can meet people. You can email the provost and tell him you want to meet with him, the dean, right? You can email Trey and say, Trey, you got me to this meeting. Now connect me with someone that's interesting, right? You can look at your colleagues in this talk and say, I want to meet your advisor. Can you give me a connection, right? And you can just keep moving that way, right? We had this with, was it Sorab and Manu, who wanted to work with Joby, and then I found out that I had a contact at Joby, and now they're getting an internship at Joby, right? So there has to be some kind of personal agency. That's one thing. The other thing is that I think engineering in general is really bad at understanding the value of networking. Having said that, you're in this event. right? And this event is about networking, is about meeting people, is about putting graduate students together, is about getting them together across differences, different interests, right? And then the grad school also has events. You know, the question is, you know, do they announce them enough? Am I connected enough? Do I seek them out enough? You know, we can always use more and better methods. But I think in the end, there's a lot of individual agency that I have done. I can tell you the same thing for faculty, right? Faculty don't network. They don't network internally, right? And I do a lot of things that are very minute and stupid, but I do think they pay off. If I'm walking down the sidewalk and the dean's walking on the other side of the sidewalk, I cross the street, right? To run into the person, to say hi, right? You go into a conference, it takes you 3 times to go to a conference for people to even know that you went to the conference, right? The first time, no one knows you. The second time, people don't care. The third time, people go like, oh, you've been here before, right? So there's also that aspect, right? It takes time and it takes a thing. I think we should be better at networking. It's one of the reasons why I take all of my students to conferences, right? So there's people that do have, you know, bigger efforts and initiatives. And I think, for example, as a group club, you should petition these things to see if the graduate school will help you. If Trey, you know, will say, hey, you know, this is important, Trey. We really like this. Can we do an internal College of Engineering conference once a semester where we present our work and we invite faculty, you know, and I don't know if they do it, right? So don't take me on this, but yeah, I think, you know, sometimes we have to be the trailblazers, right? Good question. I don't even know if I answered it.
To that end, it also seems dependent on different like advisors or like groups. So like different labs will have a certain number of people or different environments. And I feel like kind of what Dr. T was saying, it's if it's not like where you want it to be or like not everyone's like close to their peers, like the bystander effect is like there. It just takes one person to kind of start that. And so, because I know everyone in our lab is pretty close, and so we hang out outside of work and stuff, except for COVID. But so like also like just getting to know the people as people instead of just like coworkers or your boss or something like that. Because I know personally I have some of that issue of like, well, this is just a professional relationship. Like I'm gonna ask questions and stuff like that. But like it's really important on the other side to actually talk and kind of interact more on like a personal level.
I tell my graduate students when they join my group that this is a 30-year relationship. It's not a 3-year relationship. And if that scares you, perfect. Get out.
Sign up for the long haul.
Yeah, I'm here to make good friends and to see you succeed the rest of your life, right? And to later on work with you on grants, which I've done with just about all my graduated PhD students. Comments, questions, disagreements?
Yeah. I have one. First of all, thank you for your great thoughts and advices you shared with us. I think this was the most valuable, one of the good seminars that I had, because I was looking forward something like this. Since I've been a student, I've been, I'm interested in networking, and I've taken any chances that I got, I could have, as a student, volunteering for some organizations, or, being involving as a any member of a student organization. Something that I noticed, and you brought the point here that, I noticed, I see most of the, engineering students very isolated, and more isolated than other. This is just my observation from the experience. Other students from other departments, and part of that, especially for as a graduate students. And I was always thinking that how we can bring the students or even faculties together and make this relationship better. I think it's been very tough. You should be very creative. You should be, come up with some ideas to get involved in. And a point that I'm going to bring up is that, you know, it's networking and socializing is kind of a skill. And if you don't have it, it's okay. You can just work on it and gain it. And I just want to ask you, as you know, you have a great skill on this, what we can do, like, because I don't blame lots, you know, the students, they have less skills on this, and then we need to help them to just develop as a graduate student beside the like thesis or project that, you know, advisors are working. What would you like recommend, like for like graduate like departments as like mechanical engineering to just help the students develop this skill better and more? I have some thoughts, but you know, and I've done this like as in like a student organization, but I don't know what would be your recommendation to work on this skill.
Right, yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, it is as a matter of how much effort you want to put to it and how much you want to invest in it and at what scale you want to grow it. Right, there's different levels of what you want to do, right? I would say that one of the first things if you wanted to make it somewhat official and consistent, I would partner with faculty, right? I think faculty are kind of the building block in a university. And so if you want to get something moving, you want to get resources, which, you know, it's a strategic way of thinking about networking. Partnering with faculty is one way. We used to do this thing, donuts with faculty, I think in the mechanical engineering department. And it was funny because graduate students would show up, but faculty wouldn't really show up. You know, and so you need to get faculty to bring faculty and build networks and get students. You have to show people that it is worth something, right? So it's also important for you to sell the idea, just like you sell a proposal. And it is also counter to the idea of a graduate student who is a person who dedicates their life to tackle a problem over and over and over and over, more and more defined in a smaller and smaller condition. What is the joke? Until they know everything about nothing, right? Because you take the limit. You study so much about something so little that in the end, you know. But the point is that is kind of in a way counterproductive because you're being gauged almost individually. We don't know how to really gauge multidisciplinarity. We like to talk about it, but we don't know how to gauge it. And actually, as a matter of fact, it takes 10 times longer to get a multidisciplinary project just started, let alone working. And so you are fighting a lot of the things that are kind of counterproductive. But if you learn to like have a multi-pronged approach, right? Here's where I develop my scientific knowledge, my paper writing, and here's where I develop my network, and you dedicate time. I mean, it really is about building a strategy. And I can tell you that if you're saying these things, everybody's saying these things, right? A lot of people are with you on getting together and being creative in COVID and valuing getting to know each other. I live here with 300 students, right? And they're all honor students, so they're gonna be big shots. And I try to always tell them, don't be so naive and think that these are your friends, right? 300 students every year for the past 10 years that this building has been working, right? That's a lot of network out there that you're part of.
It's a lot.
Right? The same thing with you, right? You're a VT Hokie. You carry that name. Wherever you end up, there's probably going to be a Hokie. So if we value those things, I think we need to spend time. And that's the only way you know something is really worth it, is if you're putting in time to it, you're bringing in people together, you're getting people to buy into it, you're showing them why it's important, and I think those things will grow, right? And getting faculty to buy in because they have access to resources. You know, you tell faculty, hey, can you help us? Can you sponsor us? Can you pay for the donuts next week? They'll do it. Like a lot of us will do it. We'll love to do that. As a matter of fact, the department head will pay for that, right? The department head doesn't pay for anything. I'm just kidding, right? So I think you need to be proactive. You need to team up, and you need to look for investments in different levels.
Thank you very much. That is great. And also, like, I was thinking that maybe, like, it could be nice to, at the beginning of the, like, you know, for first semester for the graduate student, you know, there is a like course or something that, you know, I think, you know, sometimes this is my strategy that, you know, if you see something like a weakness somewhere, just step in it and just do a little bit, you know, something there. And this is mine. And I was thinking, I'm looking forward to it, but I don't know how to. I know that, you know, Dean Duprat has like made one of the like courses that it was very valuable for me as a first semester. I took it, and I think, you know, that would be very valuable, like as a, even, I don't know, as a credit or, you know, voluntary or something. Just have this class and then equip the students with these skills.
Right, and it doesn't have to always be for credit, right? You could do it for things that you value, and you can get faculty to pitch in and do this. I mean, what Trey is doing with his lectures, I think it's kind of along the same line, right? Getting people together, getting them to talk, bringing different topics, and then you could do it more specific to departments and push that down. Yeah, I think those are great ideas.
Absolutely. And anything that you need, definitely feel free to reach out to us. We can help support you in your endeavor. I like the ideas of a pop-up network. How do we do that? And what's creative and innovative about that? There's one more question before we end the session. What are some of the ways to strengthen the connection we made in a conference after the conference is over? I think you identified having a strategy. So I'll let you answer that question.
Right. So I'll tell you a great story, which we went to a conference, and if it works with this, it'll work with anything. We went to a conference. I had to leave a day early before one of my more seasoned PhDs presented, so I was okay. I was like, you know what you're doing. I don't have to be here. I need to be somewhere else. I left. He presented, and a big shot from a big university got up and started yelling at him. All right? So it's like about as horrible as you can imagine it going for a PhD student or any student, right, in a conference. And telling him that they had done the work and that this was not plagiarism, but very close to that, and that they hadn't referenced things right. I mean, it was horrific, right? I'm sitting in my office because I'm already home, and my phone just starts ringing left and right. All my colleagues are calling me, say, oh, this idiot attacked your student, blah, blah, blah. I get an email from the professor who attacked my student saying, I'm pretty sure you're gonna hear that I was rough with your student, right? So he was like apologizing, but not. It was hilarious, right? And of course, my student was like devastated. So he came back, we sat down, and we said, you know what? We're gonna make something out of this. And what we did is, instead of getting offended, you know, and calling him maybe some proper, not so nice names, we said, hey, why don't we reach out to him and say, hey, let's talk more about what happened. Let's, you think we did this work, why don't you give us some references and we'll check them out? So he did. He was actually quite surprised that we reached out to him. He sent us some references, and then we wrote back and we said, hey, this is great work, but I think here are our differences, and this is why it's not the same. He was happy with us. He later invited my graduate student to give a seminar, and we're talking at a top 10 university, right? And they're buddies now. Like, they're buddies. They talk to each other, and this guy is still kind of like rough around the edges. It's his character. But they're buddies. They go back and forth, right? So just like that was a worst case scenario, and we were, you know, graceful, and we tried our best to not let it get to our head. I would say you go to a conference, you make a contact, you get back home, you send that person an email, you ask him for a Zoom call, you say, hey, I'm in town, I'll be at, you know, Virginia Tech this week. I'd love to come by and see your lab. You know, just like you would with any other friend or any other relationship. And so that's what I would do. I would just follow up on those things. Don't let them die. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect. It won't work out the first time. You know, people send me emails 3-4 times in a row, and then they say, you never answered my email. And I'm like, I'm sorry, like I wasn't like intentionally deleting your emails, right? And so be gracious and follow up and do your best. And I think you can do that with anything you do, right? And so just like I said before, they're people just like you. And they love to talk about their work. They love to learn about your work. So just follow through with emails and conversations and provide opportunities for you guys to keep talking. Do that with the program manager of your project, right? If your advisor feels comfortable enough, you're reaching out to them, you know, or you've met them in person, do that too. right? Look, if you're working on a project that a program manager is paying for, he probably wants to hire you at the end, right? Especially if you're doing a good job. So he wants to know you as much as you want to know them. Good question. Was that Helder?
Yeah. Well, I want to say thank you so much, Pablo, for this conversation. We will have you back in the fall so that we can engage more and hopefully do more networking as part of the presentation. I think this is very beneficial, even as an administrator here at Virginia Tech. You're absolutely right. We create silos and we don't do enough to network. I will take you up on a cup of coffee and follow up to get to know you even more. Students, we just want you to know that we're here for you, and anything that you need, please do not hesitate to let us know. We're building out more programs and activities for the graduate students, so please keep in mind your ideas do matter, because I took this information from the survey. So if you have ideas, talk to me. Let me know.
Is it me or did he freeze?
Lost him.
He froze, Trey.
Oh, I'm sorry. But we'll be in touch. Anything that you need, please let us know. And we'll go from there.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you all for putting up with me. I hope to see you outside someday.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Dr. T.